Here are some tips on how to improve cable one-arm reverse flies. This is my favorite way at the moment to train my rear delts, the backside of my shoulders. So what I'm doing is I'm using a wrist cuff, and you can get this cheap off Amazon, but I like this compared to a handle because instead of having to grip a handle, which activates a lot of forearm muscles, with this I can just have this on the backside of the wrist, right where your wrist would bend. You can put it on the backside of that. And then whenever I'm doing the movement, all I have to really focus on is pulling through the cuff. And that allows me to relax my arm and better isolate that rear delt for better mind-muscle connection. The other thing I'm doing is I have the pulley a little bit lower than my shoulder. So that way, as I'm performing the movement, I can actually pull a little bit upward. And for me, I find that that better isolates my rear delt. Whereas if I'm pulling it horizontally, you're going to activate a little more lat, and especially if you were pulling like high to low, that would be a lot more lat. So a little bit of an angle where you're pulling slightly up throughout the movement helps to keep the lat out of it and get more of that isolation into the rear delt. Another tip is when we're doing this is to load the stretched position. So what I'll do is I'm going to accept the weight on the cable, but have the cable be kind of parallel with my body. So, well, I guess whatever line of the body you want is the cable should be going side to side. And what this does is now I'm maximally loaded in this stretched position. And then as I'm pulling through the wrist, I can think of pulling far out to the side. I don't want to pull back like this. It's not a row. So I want to pull through the backside of my wrist and think of pulling as wide as I can. So I'm going to let it be stretched and loaded in this position, and then I pull really wide. And this helps me isolate that rear delt. So we have the wrist cuff, we have the pulley height, and we're thinking of loading the stretched position and pulling wide with the movement. So those are the 4 tips that'll help me better isolate my rear delt. And then we can throw a 5th tip in there, is I like to do this for higher reps. So usually I'll do sets between 10 to 20 reps. So that way, again, I can feel a good isolation into the rear delt. If I were to go any heavier, I would start to activate my traps and a lot of other muscles that I don't want. So going a little bit lighter, going for 10 to 20 reps helps you get better isolation. And then the way I like to push the intensity on this is to do partials. So as I can't pull out any wider, I would just do a couple little partials. And that really helps, that really helps to fry out that muscle and burn that up. So those are, I think, 5 tips in total that'll help improve your one-arm reverse flies. The next exercise I'm doing today is cable seated pull downs. I'm using a neutral grip handle. However, this allows for the handles to spin, and it has width choices. So I can do a narrow grip, shoulder width, wider. I can do underhand, any angle, neutral, overhand. What I'm doing today is I'm choosing shoulder width, but specifically where as I pull my elbows down towards the floor, it feels as though I can pull in a straight line. I'm not having to pull around my body or hitting my upper arm into my lats. So I'm choosing shoulder width, but it's probably a little bit wider with the intent that as my elbows go down, it can glide right past my body. That's what allowed me to get the deepest contraction for my lats. Doing this movement, the way I'm setting up is to target the lats. So I'm going to use my wrist straps, get myself into place, and I have it set to where if I sit too straight up, the weight stack actually touches. So this will prompt me to squeeze through my back and lean. So I want to arch a little back while I'm doing this movement. That helps me engage my lower lats. And then if I stay in that arch and I think of letting my arm stretch up and then driving my elbow down towards the floor, it allows me to really isolate and get a deep contraction in the lower lat. If I wanted to, I could pull, instead of pulling down in front to get the lower lat, I could actually pull into my chest and that would get my mid back. I'd probably want to go a little bit wider with my grip. but you can change your body position to target different areas of the back. So this is what I'm doing today to help me get that lower lat connection. What I'm also doing, and you'll see in the repetitions, is I'm performing a pause at the bottom. What this is going to allow me to do is to feel the lower lat contract and hold the weight. So that way I know I'm not just throwing the weight to the bottom and using momentum and a mixture of any other muscles. I want to pause the contraction to then see and feel, okay, what is really holding the weight? If my lower lats are really contracted and I can feel that, that's what I want, because that way I know I'm targeting that area. I'll usually perform these with pauses. If I lose the pause, maybe I'll do 1 or 2 kind of rhythm reps, like a burnout rep. But I like to do the pause, especially if I'm doing this towards the beginning of my back workout. So after this, I still have probably 2 more variations of rows. And on those ones, I'll maybe be a little more aggressive, maybe not do the pause. But the first heavy movement of the day, I like to get that mind-muscle connection built up. And that would be the benefit of the paused reps. Okay, so get myself into position. I'm going to slide my hips closer to the weight stack, and then I'll arch back and accept the weight. And then again, I'm thinking of driving my elbows down towards the floor. So arch, and then drive and pause. So that's 1, good stretch. Drive and pause, 2. So this is the tempo I'm using, and I'm really focusing on trying to get my lower lats. So I'll actually play with my hand angle, maybe use a slightly underhanded position to try to target more of that lower lat. But this is a great, great, great exercise to get those lower lats. Okay, I'll try one more. Whew. Okay, and you can see even while I was failing there, I wasn't allowing my body to swing. I wanted to stay isolated into those lower lats. If you catch a couple sets like this, you're going to get a really good pump, and you'll know that it was working well. The next exercise is a specialized variation of a cable seated row. This is actually more of a horizontal shrug rather than a row. My focus is going to be to use the handle and get in a initial contracted position where the shoulder blades are pulled together and slightly down. I'm trying to target my lower traps. Once I have that contraction, I'm going to think of extending my shoulders forward, but I'm not going to allow my arms to fully extend. So I'm going to contract my back and then think of just releasing the shoulder blades and then squeezing the shoulder blades back. Release and squeeze. I'm trying to isolate the lower traps in the mid-back, the rhomboids. And in order to help me do that, I'm going to minimize my arm involvement. This is going to actually allow me to target that mid-back area and pre-exhaust those muscles before my final row. Today, I think I'm going to do a T-bar row, which is going to be a nice heavy overloaded movement. If I isolate my mid-back and really pump that up, build that mind-muscle connection, build some fatigue in that area specifically, then when I move to a heavy compound row, that area that I've pre-fatigued will fail first or be able to be driven further into true fatigue. That's going to allow it to actually get better development. This would be similar to what we do to build our chest. Is one of the recommendations I give to all my clients is to isolate their chest with chest flies before they do their chest presses. This will allow, when they go into their presses, their chest is most fatigued. So then when they fail their pressing movements, they're failing because the chest is failing, not because of stabilization issues or the triceps. This is the same concept, but for our mid-back. So if you're struggling to build depth and thickness in the middle of the back, this would be a great exercise. I'm using a mag grip handle, which is a maximum advantage grip handle. It has a kind of an angled bend to it. Probably shouldn't put it against a black shirt. There you go. That'll be much easier to see. So it has an angled bend, and then I'm going to be grabbing it kind of narrow and thinking of getting that squeeze, and then just release the squeeze and then squeeze back in. Now, for this movement, similar to what we were talking about with the reverse flies, it helps to keep a little bit of a higher rep range, so that way bigger, stronger muscles don't take over, and you can really focus in on that one little weak area that you're trying to build. So for this, I usually do sets of 14 to 20 reps, somewhere in there. Okay, now the other thing is you'll notice that I can get into position and have the weight stack touching. Similar to the pull downs, once I arch and get into position, now if I were to rock my body too much or overuse my arms, the weight stack touches. So that's a really good cue that I've let my body position go. So setting up our movements with very little tolerance in regards to positioning is actually important and helpful in that it gives us feedback of what our positioning is during the movement. Okay. So again, just letting the shoulders stretch and squeeze, but not overly involving my arms. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Okay, so I lost count, but I felt as though if I snuck in a couple more reps, they might have been pretty good, but I might have also started to sway a little bit or even lean back, which would start to incorporate more of my upper traps, which I don't want. I would rather stop a few reps short and just do an extra set than to get a couple extra reps, but they're actually not the right muscles or the right position, so those reps wouldn't matter anyhow. So once I feel like my technique might be getting sloppy, I would rather stop and get a whole nother set of really good technique reps. So give this movement a try if you want to build more thickness and density to the middle of your upper back. Now we have our final back movement, which is going to be our heaviest movement of the day. It's the one that's going to now pull open and kind of finish off all the little target areas that we've been wanting to work on. So I targeted at first my rear delts. This will help kind of finish those off as well. We went into the lower lats. This will finish that off. And then we went to that mid back area, and this will finish that off as well. So now that we've targeted those areas, we do something big, heavy, and challenging, and just let it kind of destroy whatever's left. With this, what I'm using today is a T-bar row, and I'm doing an overhand position. This helps me target my upper back kind of shoulder to shoulder. And that is an area on my physique that I want to continue to build and develop. I did competitive powerlifting for a long time. I worked up to, actually got a 700-pound deadlift, which I'm very proud of. In the process of doing that, though, I have a relatively long torso. So I built up my spinal erectors, my obliques, and I had that power belly going on. I needed all of those muscles in order to hold my spine in proper position. But now that I'm transitioning into more of a bodybuilder type training, I would like to eventually compete in classic physique. I want to bring all this thickness down. So I haven't been doing heavy deadlifts for a while, and now when I'm choosing upper back movements, I want to make sure that I'm targeting the shoulder to shoulder area, not my spinal erectors. T-bar rows is something that I often see people do incorrectly, in the sense that it would, unfortunately, target their spinal erectors, build their obliques and their power belly, because they tend to go too heavy and they use a lot of body sway and body momentum. What I'm working on doing is allowing this to be a heavy movement, however, limiting that body torso change. So once I'm in position, I grab the handle and kind of get into a nice bent over position. I want to think of locking my hips in place. So right where my torso and my hips meet, I want to lock this in place. Now, if my shoulders stretch and squeeze, that's okay. but I don't want to have this creating a lot of movement. I don't want to see my hips going forward or backward. I can allow my shoulders to kind of round and squeeze a little bit as long as I'm feeling it in the upper back and not my spinal erectors. But I don't want to have a lot of movement in my hips. I'm also choosing a T-bar row with this handle. My dad actually helped me make this handle because it allows a more upright position. I do sometimes do barbell bent over rows. We have a Smith machine here at home, so I'll do the Smith machine rows. Those tend to have more of a bent over position, and that will involve more of the spinal erectors, the core, the obliques. I do those from time to time, but not as often, as I try to find variations of rows that are either chest supported, more of a cable seated row, or something like this where it's a hybrid of a very high torso angle row. So I'll go ahead and do a set here. And the tip for this movement is just to make sure that you find a balance between going heavy enough that it feels systemically challenging, kind of beats up everything that you want, but not so heavy that you're getting a lot of that hip movement. We'll see how I do. Now, get into position. I do use wrist straps because I want to be training my back, not my grip. If I wanted to build my grip, I would train that separately at the end of my back training or on another day. So use wrist straps if you feel like your grip might be a limiter. We want to make sure that we fail the movement because our target muscle fails, not because our grip fails. Okay, here we go. Okay, I think that was like 12 or 14, somewhere in there. I feel like that was pretty good. As I mentioned with the cable mid shrugs, rather than pushing for an extra rep or two and having the quality fail, I'd rather stop the set where I know I'm in the right muscles and just do an extra set. So what I'll do for this is I might have a goal of say 10 to 14 reps. If I get 14 here, I do another set. Maybe I'll get 13 or 14, another set. Maybe I'll fail down to maybe 12 to 13, another set, then maybe 11 to 12. If I'm seeing that, if I'm keeping the same weight and I'm doing multiple sets, I should see that my rep count starts to fade. If it's doing that, then I've picked the right weight and I'm going to a good intensity in my working sets. If I find that across multiple sets, I'm doing the same rep count, like 14, 14, 14, 14. I'm probably going a little too light or being a little too cautious with those first one or two sets and not pushing closer to failure. So that's an indicator that I use to make sure that I'm pushing my intensity enough, but not too much. So if you give that a try, hopefully all these tips will help. To finish off today's pull workout, I'm going to do some cable bicep curls. I like to start with a bicep curl option that pulls the muscle open and gets a nice full range of motion, especially in the bottom stretched position. This not only helps us ensure that we open the muscle and we'll get a better performance in our second heavier bicep movement, but it's also really good for overall elbow health. If we do a lot of heavy back movements, we can sometimes create a lot of damage and shortness in the bicep. What this means is you'll see a person over time when their arm is at rest, rather than it just hanging straight down, it starts to kind of hang bent. They're going to have then trouble getting supinated, like a flat palm position. That can start to lead to wrist, elbow, and shoulder pain. When we start our biceps, if we just start with something simple that pulls and stretches everything open, that's a little bit of mobility work built into our growth training, and that will help alleviate some of those mobility issues. So what I do is I just put the cable all the way at the bottom. I'll then step out so there's some tension, and I have my upper arm stabilized beside my body. From here, I'm just going to curl up. Now, the cable does come up and kind of touch the backside of my forearm, but I'm really emphasizing this full stretched position. I keep my upper arm stable right beside my body. So even when I'm at the bottom and my arm is fully extended, there's actually still weight load on my biceps. So this helps to pull open any tight tissues, especially through the forearm and elbow joint. So our brachioradialis and those type of muscles that are related to grip can sometimes be very tight after back training, and that's what causes some of those mobility issues. So I like to start with something like this, just nice, slow and controlled. This not only opens up those muscles, but it starts to pump up our bicep. And then when we go into our second bicep movement, we now have a pump in the muscle. And when we load that heavy and go aggressive, it pulls the tension through the bicep rather than loading the connective tissue. So it actually makes the second movement healthier and more effective. Let me change arms while I'm yapping here. So again, this is very slow and controlled. I'm going to get a good stretch and let the arm actually straighten out at the bottom of this movement. Usually for this, I'll do pretty high reps, 10 to 20, but almost always more around the 20 mark. I'm not really trying to have the muscle at risk in this movement. I do want to have it challenging, so this will burn and create a lot of challenge by like say 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, somewhere in that range. But I don't want to go too heavy and risk injury. So the goal is just finding something that's challenging towards those upper rep ranges. But this is the motion, nice and simple. Well, it looks simple, it's actually really hard. I think you're actually going to like this if you give it a try. And then we'll load it heavy with something to really pull open the pump that we've now created. To finish out the workout, I'm going to do cable curls. I'm now just going to face in. I used a different handle to give myself a little bit of a longer range of motion. However, you'll notice that at the bottom, I'm going to let my arm extend, but I'm not going to get to that fully locked out position. I want to keep it just a little bit short of that because it helps protect the connective tissue. So I'm going to use my bar here for stabilization so I don't sway and move my body. And then it's just a nice, really heavy curl. As I come to the top, I do like to bring my elbow a little bit forward as long as my hand is staying on the front side of my elbow joint. That means that the cable's pulling away and the bicep is still loaded. If I keep my elbow down and I curl to here, I'm getting a good contraction in the bottom of the bicep. But if I bring my elbow forward just a little bit, you'll notice that you get a better contraction up here. And that helps to create more of a separation between the shoulder and the bicep. For this, I'm going to do some heavier sets of 10, usually 10 to 14, somewhere in there. And then this will finish off the pull workout for the day. So with this one, I don't go super analytical. I do like to have a little bit of rhythm reps to it and focus on something heavy. We'll see how it goes. Okay, there we go. Now, I'll probably go a little bit heavier and try another set to where it's a little closer to failure on that final rep. However, with this, I like to take shorter rests, barely a minute. So I'll do my left arm, right arm, then about a minute, then go back and forth, and then another minute, go back and forth. And I'll usually do 4 or 5, sometimes even 6 working sets. I really like to load and pump the muscle up, and it's a great way to end the workout feeling swollen, feeling like you did something pretty good. So there's a ton of tips in today's video for creating a pull day and all the individual tips for all the individual exercises. If you have any questions, put them in the comment section below. Same thing with requests. If there's anything you want to see in future videos, let me know in the comment section below. That's everything. Thank you for watching.